your congregation yearning for renewal and growth? Do you hunger and thirst for fresh ideas to breathe life anew both inside and outside of the church walls? If you knew of a ministry team of the district that could offer help and resources, would you be interested? The Church Revitalization and Development Team exists to aid congregations in the areas of self-assessment, renewal, and growth. We are working to offer resources to congregations such as church board consultations, coaching avenues for pastors, workshops and training opportunities on church growth, and information regarding revitalization grants and fundraising. The Church of the Brethren is a remarkable church, focusing and acting in community and togetherness. But what does that look like in today's world, where community and togetherness appear much different than they did in the past? The Church Revitalization and Development Team desires to walk with you in discovering God's will for your congregation's path into the future. Please contact the district office for more information.
Hi, Purvi. I'm so glad to see you today. I've been thinking about you lately because I've heard about an upcoming event that I want to tell you about. I've noticed that you have gifts for working with people. I wonder what God might be inviting you to do with your life.
You mean becoming pastor?
Could be, but not just pastoral ministry. There are many types of ministries.
Like what?
There are a variety of chaplaincy ministries, many administrative ministries, mission work, and a lot more.
Well, when is this event?
Here, I have the information for you. It's Calling the Called, and it's happening in the fall of 2021. There'll be an emphasis on discernment, discipleship, and direction. It will be a time for exploring, reflecting, and discerning your call, hearing other stories, and discovering pathways to ministry. I hope that you'll join us.
Definitely. Thank you, Linda.
Rick, will you open us up, please?
Sure will. Good evening to you, my brothers and sisters of the Illinois-Wisconsin District. Welcome to tonight's virtual district potluck. Now, for those of you who may not know who I am Rick Koch, the pastor of the Milledgeville Church of the Brethren, better known as the Dutchtown Church in this area. And by now, having gone through a few nights of this virtual potluck, you've got it figured out that if you don't have your dinner in front of you, you're not going to get fed here, at least your belly. Nope, we're here to fill your soul, your mind, and your heart with all sorts of good stuff. Now, on to what's going to take place tonight. First of all, tonight's first session is brought to you by Del Monte Foods. Oh, wait a minute. I had to do that one out of somewhere else. No. That's a plug for a different time. Rick, get your act together. Tonight's first session begins at 6:30 p.m. and it's by Enten Eller, and he will be tackling the subject, the topic, IT in the church, something we all can learn from. Now, our second illustrious presenter is someone you all know well within our district for his leadership and his musical prowess. Let's give it up for Jonathan Shively. Boy, rough crowd. Anyway, Jonathan's presentation will begin at 7:30 and is titled Leader Limits, Helping Your Pastor to Thrive. Later on, these sessions, as will all sessions, they will be posted to the Illinois-Wisconsin YouTube page if you couldn't catch them live. I hope that you enjoy and learn from tonight's topics and those others that will come later this week. Now, if you would, please join me for a word of prayer. Mighty God, holy God, in this season of Lent, we want to thank you for all of the things you're teaching us when we gather for prayer, when we read your word, when we worship. But tonight, Holy Spirit, may you fall upon all who are taking part in this virtual potluck. Be especially upon our leadership. Be with Brother Enten and Brother Jonathan as they share from the heart, as they share some things that are important to them. Lord, may the opportunities we have tonight also be one of fellowship to gather with brothers and sisters from around the district. Now, Lord, we thank you. We thank you for this opportunity to learn and to be with one another, but mostly to be with you. Amen.
Enten, we'd like to turn this over to you now. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thanks, Leonard, and thanks, Rick. Welcome, friends, many of whom I have met before and some who may be a little bit new to me, but glad that there's such a good group here. I want to begin with this potluck of extending charity by asking for your thoughts and prayers for me as well as for our denomination, as I was just called last Thursday to a district position for church video streaming specialist. And so I started Monday with the Atlantic Northeast District of trying to resource congregations with how to be online and all the technical and theological challenges that come with that. And so I both want to congratulate you all for having the first official presentation of any district in the denomination by me in my new capacity, but also to ask for your prayers as I try to do that work while still pastoring 2 other churches and continuing with my other responsibilities as well. So it's delightful to be with you all in Illinois, Wisconsin, and I just sort of wanted to jump in. We're online now. We've had to move things online. This potluck is certainly a whole lot better when you can eat together and do things together, but that's just not possible now, even though we see the light at the end of the tunnel. But the pandemic has taught us some things and changed a lot of things that aren't going to go back to normal. They won't go back to the way that they usually were. And I'd like to begin by sort of laying out the situation for you, not that you haven't been in it and living it and know it, but I'm going to share a few slides. And then what I really want to do is come back here to gallery view where we can all see each other and have a conversation with you. So I'm hoping to do less presentation and more conversation, as a true potluck would really be more like. But let me start by sharing a couple of things. And I'm going to look over here at my other machine and share the slides from there. So where these slides come from is the Barna Research Group. And Barna is a well-known name in church research. They spend a lot of time tracking trends. And when the pandemic started, they had suspicions that things were happening. And so they did some surveys and tried to figure out what was going on. And while these slides are going to be hard to read for a lot of you, I'll try to interpret them, and feel free to unmute your mic and tell me if you've got questions. In other words, stop me at any time along the way and interject if you'd like to. But what this slide is showing, and hopefully you can see my mouse circling on that first line, the first question, and this is all for what they call practicing Christians. So this is not the unchurched, this is not in general, this is people that attended church at least once a month, if not every week, before COVID. And they asked, are you still only attending the same church that you did pre-COVID? And only 35% said yes. The next question was, have you switched churches from the church you were going to before COVID? And 14% said yes. The third question is, have you stopped attending church during COVID? And 32% said yes. And then, are you viewing multiple churches throughout the month? And 18% said yes to that question. But again, part of my concern is this 32% that stopped attending a church that they are attending, most of them weekly. when the pandemic hit. That's for a couple of reasons, but it's not all whether the churches are available or not. The next question that Barna decided to ask was to basically look at church attendance by generational, because we often talk about younger people, older people, and young people are good at tech, and older people are more faithful perhaps, and we have preconceptions, but they wanted to check that out. And the blue bars are those who stayed at the same church, and this is for baby boomers, for Gen Xers, and then for millennials. And as you can expect, more of the boomers stayed at the same church, but only 40%, down to 31% for Gen X and 30% for millennials. Switched churches, interesting, Gen X is higher than millennials, but stopped attending altogether. The younger the generation seemed to be, the more they just gave up on church, even as churches went online, which we tend to think would appeal more to younger generations. So not sure what conclusions to draw from that immediately, but we'll talk through some of that. Before the pandemic, they said, did your church offer an online service? And 50% of the churches was a definite no, and 7% of the respondents said they didn't know, which is pretty interesting. So I'm guessing it was actually closer to 2/3 of the churches did not have any online service before the pandemic, while 36% did. But now during the pandemic, 67% of what had been about 64% of churches that did not offer anything online have now offered something online. So 2/3 of us, at least, have gone online during the pandemic. And since this survey was done more around, I believe, January, then I think that number has been shifting more, or it may have actually been September. I'm not sure when that particular question was asked. Although this one says September 1 through 15 on this slide, so I wonder if there isn't quite a change. But these next couple of slides are where I find interesting and troubling statistics. There's a lot to unpack about this one. This is talking about pre-pandemic attendance and attendance in September, once the pandemic was about 6 months in. And I wish that when Barna had prepared these slides, they'd used the same colors back and forth to mean the same things, but they didn't, but they at least put them in the same order. And so the first line is all US adults, where 14% of the US adults never attended pre-pandemic, but now 53% of adults are not attending church. Just that kind of shift is amazing. But for me, you look at practicing Christians, those that pre-pandemic, you look at these two colors, they have been in church within the last month. Most of them have been in church every single week. Compare this now to post-pandemic, and you see things shifting. In fact, let me show you this slide. Pre-pandemic, 79% of Christians, practicing Christians, were in church every single week, once a week. During the pandemic, that's dropped to 51%. For me, I like to look at the other end of the graphs, though, and over here, of practicing Christians, 23% are now have shown up once or twice or never in 6 months, as opposed to they were there at least every week or at least once a month. So we have, as a whole wide sweep of Christendom, have lost 23% of our attendees due to this pandemic, is what that data indicates to me. And of course, if you look down at churched adults, churched meaning not as much practicing, but ones who consider themselves a part of a church, pre-pandemic, 80% attended within the past month, and only 20% were more than a month ago, but within the past 6 months. That 20% may have been occasional or, Christmas, Easter sort of Christians, but still identified with the church. Once the pandemic hit, not only did that same weekly or within the past month shrink to 60%, but again, I look at that tail down there of 32% are, once or twice or never. And these are of people that consider themselves members of churches. I mean, that they consider themselves part. So we are seeing some real significant shifts with attendance. Where some of this goes, though, Barna actually asked a question that I found really fascinating and really helpful. And that was, after the pandemic, when we get through all of this, what kind of church service will fit your lifestyle the best? And surprisingly, the stark blue is still, being in person, seeing each other. We expected that. And we expected boomers to be stronger on that too. But I did not expect a amazing 1/4 of boomers also say, but we want an online church option as well. And I thought about that for a little bit, and I wondered, there's a number of reasons, not just lifestyle change. It may be health and ability or safety or travel. We'll talk more about that. But what this graph demonstrates to me, especially with younger generations, but not just limited to younger generations, that unless we are having both in-person services as well as offering the option for online services, or what we'll call hybrid services, perhaps, if you do both at the same time, that we stand to not be meeting the needs of at least 1/4 of all generations to closer to 40% of our folks. That was a little bit sobering for me to see that kind of hard data. But also, people have been concerned about younger people, and especially the younger generations want both in-person as well as digital ministry options. 1 in 5 of the churched millennials and Gen Z, those that say they belong to a church, say that they've been rethinking or drifting away from their faith practices during the pandemic. And we've always had a concern about young people. And so the question is what can we do to keep them engaged or to meet their needs? And Barna concludes that the hybrid church is the future, one that has both online as well as in person, and asks these questions, which may not be the same questions that we would ask. What has changed and continues to change? What's working or not? What's possible? How do we reimagine traditions? How do we cultivate community? And how do we disciple? So that's just sort of laying out the issues that as I see them. And I found that Barna study to reflect what I've experienced just myself in working with congregations. And so I want to just start a conversation with you all about basically about churches being online and what that means. And I've got a couple of questions that we can address, but as we come out of this pandemic, the question that I use to sort of start most conversations, given that in the Ambler Church of the Brethren in Pennsylvania, where I pastor, we have had people that were shut-ins. They were physically not able to come to church, that once we moved online, started joining us every week. And I think that some of you may have experienced that too. We suddenly realized that there were accessibility barriers that our church had by only having services there in our sanctuary that we weren't as aware of. And so as we move out of the pandemic and have people that for physical or emotional reasons have not been able to be within the building, and we've attracted people from a much greater geographic area now as well. So we have what I'll call translocal folks. My question is, as we're extending charity to the least of who are members of my family, how can we not shut out the shut-ins when we go back to meeting in our buildings? How can we still stay more accessible? So that's one of the reasons I've been working at hybrid kind of worships, but I've got questions about how you work with translocal people, how you include them, how you work with them, because one of the things that has always been a pull of mine is how to help people at a distance really be fully included in what's going on, whether it's in a classroom or in a worship service or in a meeting. And too often those who are at a distance are kind of second-class citizens because they're not noticed as much, they can't ask questions in the same way, they can't participate. And so I worked really hard at that when I was faculty at Bethany and working with electronic communication. But now that it's church, how do we stream a worship service that may be happening in person and still include people that are at a distance so that they're a part of the worship? Because for the Church of the Brethren, theologically speaking, our understanding of worship is that it's the work of the people together. It's the gathered body of Christ. That's not the same as for all of our Christian sisters and brothers. My example is the Episcopalian priest who is being live streamed from her cathedral, you know, doing the worship service and sharing the Eucharist, is completely fulfilling what in the Anglican tradition is worship as she goes through that whole liturgy. But for brethren, that doesn't apply because we need everyone to be involved. We're not just spectators of a liturgy that happens. We need to be participants. So that's where I start coming to thinking about how to do online technology well. So what thoughts do you have? What responses? What comments? Generative questions? What do you bring to tonight's session that you'd like to talk about or ask?
Enten, Blaine Miner, you and I have had plenty of conversations, and I guess as we're talking about this and reaching out in the live stream, the issue that we've run up against is technology itself. And you know, my computer, I've got a good connection. Downloading's not the issue. It's when we go the other direction. And wondering how do we fix that?
It's a good question, Blaine. And if you're talking just about internet connections, rural churches are significantly at a disadvantage. You know, we just know that. Rural communities are disadvantaged connection-wise. So some of it is searching around, and it's just really fascinating that, to me, of all the things that we often try, which is looking at different service providers, seeing if there's now a new cell tower around where maybe a 4G or a 5G connection is becoming available. But honestly, one of the best answers is right on the horizon, literally. It's Starlink. That Starlink internet system that actually is available now in portions of Pennsylvania and further northern reaches of the country, and is starting to expand, will bring super reliable, super capable satellite internet to any location. That's still coming. You know, they're just rolling it out now. So I can't say that depending on your latitude that you'd be available to get it. But pricing is also not too bad. It's not great, but for, I think the current pricing is $99 a month. That gives you, I mean, crazy stuff, crazy fast speeds for people that are used to really poor rural internet. Speeds like, you know, 75 to 175 megabits per second upload, and sometimes up to 300 download, where I know some congregations struggle to get 1.5 up, and 3 down these days. Is that helpful, Blaine? Am I touching on what you were asking? And you're muted.
You're
still,
muted,
sorry.
Blaine.
So yes, that gets at it. That's been the biggest thing. And then also having various, at one point I was using Facebook Live and Chrome as my service provider. And then 2 months into doing that, Chrome said, we're not supporting Facebook Live. And it hit me an hour before I was supposed to start the service, and trying to come up with, okay, what server can I use now and do the download, do all that stuff quickly. And so, the other issue is, compatibility of all these services. I mean, if they're not going to play with each other, then that's frustrating too.
I can, if I can, Enten,
Sure.
Highland Avenue. I've invested a lot of time in the past, say, couple months, working on specifically the internet connection question. I mean, there's advertised speeds and there's actually what you get. There are other elements also worth considering from a technology perspective. Like Highland Avenue, we tried streaming our first service up from YouTube. We were doing Zoom through earlier in a lot of the pandemic, and switched to doing a live stream through YouTube. And we kept running into technical upload issues, and ran into disastrous situations on Sunday mornings where a couple of services just didn't work. And the team had tried upgrading the internet service. I think it's a cable connection, 300 megs down, I think 20 to 25 up. And really, the software for streaming, we only needed about, for high quality stream at 1080p, 60 frames per second, we needed about 7.5 to 10 megabits per second, but we weren't getting that. And the technical solution turned out for us to be two things. We looked at our firewall and replaced it with a device that basically it's a technology called packet queuing, where we could make sure that internet connection hogs on the connection wouldn't prevent the service stream from working. So it was very equitable in the distribution of the existing bandwidth. And then the other thing we did is we also found that there's just a line issue between the church and the building, and had the cable company come out and do a test on the line. They identified the issue, and it's been several weeks now. We've been in pretty good shape, able to stream our service. So just want to throw that in there on the question number one.
Yeah, that's helpful, Ryan. And what this all points to me, to sort of pull these two threads together, is it's hard. I'll put it this way. This is the reason that Atlantic Northeast District caught the vision of creating the position that I'm actually interim. They've created the position full-time for someone to help churches. So we're seeking a full-time person, because I was not willing to leave my pastoral positions. So I was willing to accept this just half-time interim basis until we can find a full-time person, but wanted to get it off the ground. But it's not reasonable to expect every small church to have a tech professional.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just not. So there needs to be resources, I would hope denomination-wide, that people can draw upon to be able to collaborate and assist and help, and know how to ask the questions like Ryan, you just lifted up, and how to check things like line quality, or to figure out what's going on, or Blaine to figure out what may be the best technical options for where you happen to be, and what limitations you're going to have to live with for the meantime, instead of you all trying to become experts and knock your head against brick walls and learning things the hard way.
And I'd like to throw in one other experience we had here in Peoria. We changed internet providers and went to an optic, and we thought we did our homework. And when we left our provider, we were hit with $1,052 disconnection fee, which just floored me, because I was the one that was doing it as treasurer. And with the help of the general office, Ed Wolf, I was able to get the documentation I needed that Comcast allowed us to, they waived it, But if you're going to change providers, you got to look at those clauses, because for a month and a half, since January 20th until Monday, I was afraid we were going to have to pay another $1,052 just to get out of the contract.
Did you have business class service? Is that what it was? And you had like a 3-year contract?
We were not under a contract.
Oh,
we were
interesting.
business because we had 2 phone numbers. And in order to try to save money over the years, we actually added TV because we could get a cheaper package. We had the TV equipment stapled to the wall where the router was. We never used it. And if we got rid of the TV, it was going to cost us $50 a month more.
Man.
So, you know, we did the calculations and saw that the new provider was going to give us better speed, better service. And we weren't under contract. We knew that. So we thought we were all good. And then got a piece of paper.
They still treated you like you were under contract, even though you weren't.
Yes, they did.
You had to advocate for yourselves.
Yep. So just, it was the paperwork they got you with. And so, but I just want to warn people, look at the contract or look at what you've got and ask all the questions if they're fees, because once we provided that the Church of the Brethren was 501(c) and everything like that, they waived it. But it took a little over a month to get there.
So now you have an extra $1,000 to put into something else.
No, we did not have that money before. No, we just don't have to spend that money.
What else? What questions do you have?
Well, Enten, this is Pat Riddle.
Hi, Pat.
On the other side of it, from a person looking on, I've had multiple surgeries, and every time I do, I miss a month or 2 of church. And it's frustrating to me because I'm used to being there every week. And now with having it online, I've strongly encouraged my church, which is Highland Avenue, to continue doing this because I'm not the only one, and it's an older congregation at this point, and then we just really need to have that communication.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I think about the theme of these potlucks of extending charity to the least who are members of my family. It feels like this is one of the ways we can really include people that, for whatever reason, can't make it through the church doors every Sunday.
And so we've been fortunate at Highland Avenue. We've speaking loosely, we've been able to divert funds that we haven't used because we're not meeting in person to buy equipment and kind of up our game a little bit. And I know that that's a blessing that we have, that not all churches have. So my question to you is what easy, simple, lesser expensive things can churches do to try and move online or have better quality of things online and things of that nature?
Yeah, great question, Christy. I've been working with Blaine a lot on basically that particular question, because if you invest in pretty decent, what people will tell you are PTZ, for point tilt zoom cameras, which means they can move wherever, gosh, those can get expensive for decent cameras really quickly. The ones that A&E are looking at are $2,700 per camera, and you really are suggested to do them in sets of 2s or 3s. Then a controller, and so most people, if you go to any consultant or shop around, they'll say, yeah, you'll need to start with about $12,000 worth of stuff plus installation, and then figure out how to do it. And there's got to be better answers than that for other churches that don't have that kind of budget money. So like we did at Dixon, we took a Sony Handycam that they already had on hand, and it's like, so what do we do to be able to hook this up into a computer that maybe you already have and set up streaming that way? So one of the things that, one of the reasons I'm glad that I'm able to help where I'm at now, especially in A&E and some other places, is being a good brethren. I don't think of the $12,000 solution as the first one. I'm always thinking of how can you make it work with what you have on hand. And so um, there are ways with starting with a fairly inexpensive camera for about the $1,000 that Leonard never really had in the first place. We can develop a fairly decent streaming capability. That would be a camera on a tripod going out to a YouTube account that would really connect people in. And again, sound is so important. I mean, we always talk about video, but even if a picture is kind of fuzzy, if people can hear what's going on in the service and sort of see what's happening, they're still there. If they can see with the best HD video, but they can't hear what's happening, it's mostly a loss. And so one key component is always to think about how to tie into your existing sound system, how to get good sound, or what changes you might need to adapt to be able to make sure the sound is coming across. For instance, children's stories in a lot of churches often involve maybe getting, at the front of the sanctuary or on a front pew, down with the children. But if that person doesn't take a microphone with them, there's almost no chance of capturing that sound very well. But a simple change of having the person who's down with the children having a handheld mic means that we can then get that sound into the system and share it with those who are watching from a distance. That could be a simple culture change that could make a big difference to being able to include those that are not right there in the sanctuary with us. So, Christy, to answer your question, there's a whole lot of things we can do, starting with hopefully pretty basic and inexpensive stuff and up. But there's always levels that if you have a little bit more in the budget, then maybe you can do this more and increase the quality and do best. But we don't all need what Highland Avenue has been blessed to do. And I might be able to pull it up, but I've got a picture from the newspaper article that was done on Highland Avenue and their streaming. It's a really neat setup. But the other thing is it takes a couple of people to run that much equipment. And the other thing that I want to make sure we all keep in mind is, do we have the human resources to be able to do the tech that we have, or do we need to keep things simple enough for just one volunteer to sort of be able to keep it all running? Because that's the kind of church I live in. We don't have people coming out. Ambler Church of the Brethren has an average about 45 people on a Sunday morning. We've actually gone up in the pandemic. So we're now closer to 50, but pre-pandemic, we were probably in the low 40s. So that's my church background and where my heart is at, even though I would love to continue to play with equipment that's much more appropriate for larger churches. Christy, did that help?
It did. It was good for me to hear, although it's not my situation. It was good for me to hear that we just try and take a look around and see what you got and make it work.
One detail I'm wondering about in there, Enten, what is the software you guys used to stream your audio video feed for? Was it for Dixon Church?
Yeah, and actually, we're just Blaine, correct me if I'm wrong, unless you've changed, but all we're doing is taking a direct, we're making the Sony Handycam look like a webcam and just streaming that direct. So we're not doing overlays, not needing a software encoder.
Well, we're not even doing that much. What we're doing, we're recording on a MP4 disc, and then that gets downloaded or uploaded.
Gotcha.
And then sent out on Monday. Before that, we were pre-recording, taking it, and then it would be uploaded and then scheduled to be on Facebook or on the Google Drive, scheduled for 9:30 on Sunday morning. Now that we're in person, people are there, but the service is a day later.
So Blaine, we had talked about maybe you all going streaming live at some point. Is that still in the cards, or have you just stepped back from that?
We've stepped back for the time being, but I'd like us to be thinking more about that. Some of the equipment in terms that you had shared the last time you and I talked, it's got some, we just need to like sit down and go, we're going to, we got to jump or what, and I want to agree with, echo what Pat was saying. Early on, I had a shut-in send me an email saying I was depressed, frustrated. I was, scrolling through the internet and found the service. Thank you. And so that was my aha moment. Even if we're in person, we cannot go back to that accessibility denial. So
we can go back, but we'll lose some things if we do. We will shut ourselves off from people that really want to be a part of our number. Yeah.
I don't see that as an option.
Mm-hmm. Good for you.
Enten, I have a question. This is Kathy Gingrich. Hi.
Hi, Kathy.
Do these hybrid allow for live participation verbally or otherwise from the trans locals, as you're calling them, from those who aren't in the building? Are they able to unmute or whatever and participate as if they were in the building, like sharing a joy and concern or an announcement? What platforms allow that?
Yeah, it all depends on how you set it up. So really, to be present, like we're showing now, Zoom is one of the few common video conferencing platforms among many. There's, Skype had been there and still is. There's Microsoft Teams. There's a whole bunch of other things, but those are all kind of like Zoom. They're video conferencing programs. Those are not the best platforms for streaming, but they're the best platforms for interaction. The second congregation that I have a privilege to be pastor to is the Living Stream Church of the Brethren, which is the completely online church of the denomination, which sounded a whole lot more impressive before the pandemic than it does now. But we've been online for 8 years, and we really work hard at participation, but it's not done verbally or visually. We do that through the text chat, which then can be done even if you're on, a YouTube stream or Facebook Live or some of the other ways. It all depends on how intentionally you leverage those things, how included people really become. Are you able to prioritize that? So like for joys and concerns, do you invite people who are at a distance to write in and read those things so they know they're being heard and included? Or are people who are at a distance from your service simply spectators with no input? Do you provide a channel? And see, it doesn't take someone with much tech skill to be able to be, say, the chat monitor, to be able to read those chats and to bring those then into the service so that the people who are at a distance have that bridge to really being able to fully participate. And it's not, hybrid services are just so much harder than all in person or all online, because right now here with Zoom, we're all on we're on a level platform, and I'm not on a platform higher than you are. Although if you move to the webinar platform, in a way, you can have presenters and you can do that. But right now we're all even. We all see each other, hear each other, and that's great. If we're in the sanctuary, we're basically all even. But as soon as you have a foot in each place, it gets devilishly hard. And it takes some real intentionality to include those at a distance because we're so used to being together in person that people that are not right there in the sanctuary get left out unless you do something. So, Kathy, one thing I've thought about for our small Ambler church is when we stream to still do it with Zoom and to put a picture of the Zoom meeting up on a monitor in the front of the church so that everyone sitting in a pew still sees the faces of all those who are at a distance. And they have the option to unmute their mics and talk to us. And for them to capture what's going on in the sanctuary, we'll need both a camera that is at the front of the sanctuary showing faces, as well as one at the back of the sanctuary trying to zoom in on whoever's speaking or, you know, where the action is. And it's still not going to be as good as if you were right there and able to see and hear it all, but it's trying to think through what are the options for really including people. But as soon as you get more than, you know, a certain number of people of online, and for me, it's not even when Zoom maxes out at 99, it's more like when you have more than about 60 logins, it gets to be unwieldy with how many people. It's like trying to have a small group discussion with just you and 120 of your best friends. You know, it devolves into smaller groups anyway. So there's no easy way to do Zoom when you have so many people. So you've got to think through other strategies. But for me, the most important thing is to be really intentional and think about how you're going to involve people, what strategies you want to go to, how can you do your best to not just leave them behind and make them into just spectators, even if they're able to see what you're doing, how can they participate? What are the ways they can get hooked in? Linda, I'd seen that you had unmuted your mic once. Were you wanting to throw something in too?
Yeah, I had wanted to. We've kind of like passed that part of the conversation, so it's okay. We don't need to go back.
We still have 10 minutes.
Enten?
Yes.
Dana McNeil at the Peoria Church of the Brethren.
Hey, Dana.
Could you speak to the idea of some of the ethical issues? So like you just gave the example of potentially having a camera that shoots into the congregation. And what about folks that maybe don't want to be seen on a Facebook video, you know, that's going to the whole world? Or many of our churches do a sharing time. And, you know, what kind of issues do we have about that when we're now posting that on Facebook and, you know, so-and-so's cancer diagnosis now gets broadcast, not just to their church family, but to the whole world. Could you speak to some of that? Because I think it creates some issues that we don't normally think about.
Yeah, back to the whole intentionality thing. And you didn't even mention copyrights when you talk about ethical issues, which is another whole big thing. So there's a couple of strategies that some churches are trying successfully. And others of you here may have even better ideas. But one is during Joys and Concerns, sometimes the stream sort of fades out and maybe there's recorded music played or just a graphic saying, you know, we're doing confidential prayer and sharing and the stream will resume when we're done. I mean, some congregations choose just to cut it out. Others remind people at the beginning of sharing that what's going to be shared will be public. And if you don't want it to be public, you know, just let the pastors know afterwards. And we sort of deal with it that way on Living Stream. We invite people with joys or concerns that are too tender to share to write to our prayer team. And so we can pray about that confidentially. Yeah, those are all issues to think about as far as people being visible on camera. At Ambler, we have a media opt-out policy where we invite anyone who doesn't want them or their children or whomever, you know, to appear, to let us know in writing, because we will assume that it's okay to show things unless we hear otherwise. And then when we do, then we have to work at honoring that. And sometimes parents are okay with the back of the heads of their children showing up, like for a picture of a children's time, as long as you're not looking directly at the camera. Others times they don't want them to be there at all. What we've had to do, even at annual conference with the children's choir, is to identify those children who were not to broadcast and hopefully just ask if they can be over to one side so we can still show images of the rest of the children, because people in the church want to see that and want to participate. And so, yeah, it gets tough when, say, Pat, not to pick on you, but because you volunteered, if you have to be home for a month, you still want to know what's going on with your church family. But how can you both do that and adequately protect, Dana, like you're saying, the confidentiality of what's being shared? So it takes conversations to figure out what's going to work for your congregation, what's going to work for your church. And partly where I come down is, yeah, some of that gets put out there, whether, whatever platform you're using, YouTube, Facebook, whatever. For me, I don't think that many people are going to be watching my church's stream, unfortunately. I wish that 1,000 more would. So it doesn't bother me personally, my own spaces. It doesn't bother me that much because if what's being shared in church, it's okay. I'm not, but there are people that have very different sensibilities than I do. And so how to work with them and make sure that they don't feel vulnerable and exposed is important. Dana, come back at me, but I don't think there's any one answer. It's something we've got to talk through and work through and figure out.
Yeah, I appreciate the answer. One concern I guess I have is that sometimes people share things about other people in sharing time, and that becomes an issue. It's one thing to say I'm okay with putting my stuff out there for everybody, but sometimes people share things about other people, and then you don't always know that permission's been given for that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or confidence is broken. Yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, Linda, I see your hand. So you do get to come back in.
All right. So during this time of the pandemic, when we have been either recording services and posting them or now streaming live, we have not done our joys and concerns in the manner that we formerly did. They're brought to me in advance, and that by them coming to me in advance and of the sharing time, I do the sharing and then pray over those concerns. It's different, but in bringing them that way, we know that we have that person's permission to share. If someone brings me something that it's not personal, it's from somebody else, I always go back and check with them to make sure. But that's the way that we found that works for us, is just not having that open time, but because we're streaming, doing it that way. Now, I'm sure that as we are able to talk more during our services, because now we're wearing masks, nobody's talking, nobody's singing, all that kind of stuff. When the time comes when our masks come off and we do want to share, then I think we might have to rethink how we're doing joys and concerns, and might have to go to muting them out or something like that. I don't know. My thoughts.
That's a helpful input, Ginger. Thank you. I mean, Linda, that's good, because that's another whole way of doing it where you get to screen what's going on, and that's another good strategy if that works for your congregation.
Just to add on that, one thing we've been doing is we have a Friday email that goes out as a reminder, for links or where you can find the service. and just sort of, churchy kinds of announcements. But at the end of the email, kind of there's a division in it. So you can read the top part with service information, but if you keep scrolling down, we get our joys and concerns there. And I don't know if that's feasible to do once you're in more of a hybrid situation. But I thought it was a good solution as well. I think a lot of solutions are a good solution, but that's one.
Thanks, Chrissy.
Well, in addition to that, we also, after our service and we've stopped taping, we do a Zoom with the church where we can add on to our joys and concerns, and that's just a private Zoom.
Sure. Thanks, Pat. We've got just a few minutes left. What other questions? How can I be helpful? What thoughts come to mind? What questions that I may or may not be able to answer?
I don't know if this is a quick one, but we were talking about meeting churches where they're at with the equipment that they have. Real quick, if it's possible, how do they know how they can connect what they have? Or, you know what I mean? Like, how do they even know what they can gather or do with what they have if they don't have a tech person?
That's why I'm doing what I do, is trying to be a resource person. And I would love for the position that I have to continue to go denomination wide, honestly. In fact, that was the first proposal. But the denomination was not in a place to bite on it. So, but for me, it's so important to resource congregations where they are, because I feel in my bones that this is a key inflection point with how the vitality of our denomination may move forward into the future or may get stuck in the past. And if we can make this transition to hybrid church and reaching out and being able to better connect with both older as well as especially younger generations and people where they are seeking and searching and people that are at different stages of life, but looking for ways to connect to a church, I think it has great promise for what our ongoing vitality over the next decade or two and the potential we could live into. But if we can't make that transition, churches that don't will have a much harder time, and excuse the word, but competing in the world of ideas with other congregations that are doing that if people are indeed losing the sense of both denominational connectedness as well as loyalty to a particular congregation and just looking for, where they can be fed spiritually, and they'll go, brand loyalty is not what it used to be. And so if we're not able to meet people with what they're looking for, they'll go somewhere else. And I'm not saying we need to be everything to everyone, but I really love the Church of the Brethren and love what we do and want that to be available to where people can find us and feel good about connecting with us and be a part of our community, no matter how they manage to connect.
And we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for the insight and for your knowledge that you shared with us. And we may be reaching out to you. So thank you. We're going to hear from Neighborhood a little bit more about their church. And as we get ready for Leaders Limits, Helping Your Pastor Thrive with Jonathan Shively coming up at 7:30. Thank you, Enten.
Thank you.